Suzanne Rosselet McCauley, you're very welcome and thank you for joining with me this afternoon.
It's my pleasure, Brian.
You've addressed the American Chamber of Commerce and its members today, and you were very passionate based on your extensive research experience around the issue of sustainable competitiveness. And looking at that agenda, why are some countries more successful than others in terms of competitiveness?
Well, to be honest, competitiveness is one of the most used and abused terms in modern economics. It means many different things to many different people, and that's probably one of the reasons why there's not one common definition of competitiveness. A lot of people think of competitiveness in terms of cost competitiveness. The governments will often think in terms of export dominance, and academics often interpret competitiveness in terms of unit labor costs. So really what I'm more interested in is not looking at just the performance indicators that are trying to measure competitiveness, but looking at more the underpinning factors that are going to contribute to sustaining competitiveness into the future. And in my research on sustainable competitiveness, I've been able to ascertain that some countries have been able to continue an upward path in their sustainable competitiveness over many, many years, even though there might be some volatility in that, where other countries just continue to lag behind. And the research question that was important to me was to try to better understand what might have been some of the contributing factors that helped a country sustain its competitiveness and ultimately the improvements in living standards that it brings to its population, and then why other countries were just continually having problems of convergence with the more developed economies.
Companies are always looking to identify their key success factors. When you look at countries, can you talk about key success factors that competitive countries share or have in common?
Oh yes, and in fact the empirical analysis that I did for this research over many, many indicators, more than 300 indicators over about 60 countries, with the data reduction, with the looking at the longitudinal analysis over 15 years, I was able to build a framework of 6 major competitiveness factors that helped a country sustain competitiveness, and those were macroeconomic stability, the degree of openness of a country to the outside world in terms of trade, but also foreign direct investment, the solidity of its institutions and the legal framework. This is very, very important, and some economists continue to say that institutions are one of the driving factors of long-term competitiveness, but also infrastructure. And not only basic and physical infrastructure, which Ireland has made quite a bit of progress on, but also the financial infrastructure, the access to credit, the availability of finance and venture capital to startups. And then also social infrastructure, the impetus and investment in long-term education, in talents and skills, healthcare and pensions, and then ultimately more of an equitable distribution of growth across the population. And then the third pillar of competitiveness would be the culture environment. So a very open and entrepreneurial culture. Countries' competitiveness is very much linked to the cultural heritage of a country. So the national culture, but also the corporate culture is one of the sustainable pillars of competitiveness. But then last but not least, what I call the tipping factor, to actually help countries move ahead of their rivals and help companies move up the value chain, is technology and innovation. And those are probably, that is the critical factor that is going to help sustain competitiveness and help a country move beyond just to the complacency of being competitive.
Today you demonstrated how Ireland has moved from the top 10 in many rankings to being outside the top 20 in many cases. But you also displayed some degree of confidence that there was a turning point going to happen and Ireland could look forward to better results in future indices. What lies behind that belief?
Well, as you say, this year I believe will be a turning point for Ireland. Ireland's best ranking was in 2000 when it ranked 5th in the IMD World Competitiveness Yearbook, and then year after year that ranking started to tumble down to a very low position of 24th place last year. But despite that, Ireland still ranks very high in some critical elements of competitiveness. First, for the availability of skills, but also for investment incentives, a low corporate tax rate, which is very attractive to multinationals. And FDI is also a very long-term influence on the competitiveness of a country. It creates a lot of jobs. There's harnessing of technology and knowledge transfer between multinationals, but also domestic economies, domestic companies, excuse me, and also the fact that there's a contribution to the, to the revenues of the state through taxation. So I'd say that Ireland has really started to wake up to the ultimate objectives of competitiveness, which is investing in talent, investing in its infrastructure, some of the pressure points and some of the bottlenecks that are holding maybe some investment back. Working towards establishing a very high world-class educational system as well. So for me, that leaves me very optimistic about the future capacity for improving and sustaining competitiveness for Ireland.
You've been based for many years now in Switzerland, which competes with Ireland heavily for foreign direct investment, but your work has taken you all around the world to developing and developed economies of various degrees of sophistication and challenges. In ending the interview today, when you look at your research and experience, what are the key lessons you think from Ireland's perspective should be taken away from the analysis of competitiveness?
I think a degree of openness and the culture of a country is very prominent in allowing a country to move forward in competitiveness rankings. But in the long term, it's not just the rankings that are important. And in fact, many policymakers are actually fixated on the yearly movement upwards or downwards of rankings. I think it's much more important to ask what competitiveness is actually delivering to the population in terms of social development, in terms of well-being, in terms of living standards, and also the legacy, of course, that we're leaving for our children and our grandchildren. So ultimately, competitiveness is really about having that mindset, adapting one's mindset to a changing environment. We're living today in global uncertainty that is unprecedented. And the countries and the populations that have that capacity to adapt, to be resilient, to be very positive about their future and willing to do something about it, I think those are going to be the countries that are going to break through in competitiveness in the future.
Suzanne, thank you very much for your time,
You're
and
welcome,
I hope
Brian.
that you'll come back and visit us again.
With the greatest pleasure. Thank you very much.